Alright, photography students. So I'm actually going to be doing kind of a more fun experimental edit today using this photo I took in 2020. So I'm going to be opening this up into Photoshop. So I'm just going to click on this. And what we can do is kind of play around with how hues and colors work in Photoshop and kind of make a more experimental look. But first what I want to do is create a little bit more depth. As you can see, I have a plain blue sky, so I'm actually going to incorporate a couple extra elements to give it a more fantasy look. So using Unsplash, I'm going to search for like a cool dramatic sunset sky. We could drop in, let's use this one. And then we can add in moon, like this one. If you get a moon on pure black, it actually makes it easier to drop it in. Let's do starry sky. So I'm just going to grab a couple pieces here. Kind of some bigger stars here. These will work. I'm just going to download those 3 photos. And then we'll open those into Photoshop. Actually, you know what? I'm going to open these 2 into separate tabs. And so with this photo, I'm actually going to add it to the sky replacement feature in Photoshop, which will help replace the sky. So if you go to Edit, Sky Replacement, and so there is some provided skies in Photoshop, but what you can do is click on the little plus. So if you click on this little arrow here and click on the plus, you can add more sunset photos. So I'm just going to add that one into here, which is this one. And then we will select that one. And so with the sky replacement, you can shift the edge so you can have it go further away from your subject or closer to your subject. Sometimes, as you can see here, it's cutting over subject, so we actually want to kind of just kind of fade it. The fade edge also is like how hard to the edge you want it. And then so I'm actually going to have that faded as well. You can adjust the brightness to kind of match your scene better. And you can make it cooler or warmer depending on what kind of look. So I'm actually going to go, I think this one I want to go a little cooler. There we go. You can adjust the scale of it. So if you need to kind of zoom in or out, keep in mind if you zoom out, it might not cover the whole photo. So at least be over 100%. And then you can move it up and down and around. So if you want to kind of move it to, enhance your composition. The lighting adjustment is how much it's going to kind of dim the lower part so it kind of blends better. Color adjustment is how much it's going to change the colors of the foreground. Sometimes you want more or less. It just depends on your photo setup. So that looks pretty good, so I'm going to hit OK. And what it did is it made a group here. And so in that group, you'll see if you use the little visibility as the foreground color change it did, you can click on this and you can change it with the RGB. It's a little curves adjustment. This one is the lighting. And then this one is the sky. You can see the mask. This one is looks like the sky color balance. And then this one is the sky brightness. It's a little brighter. And because these are all on separate layers, you could adjust the opacity. So if you wanted to kind of be more like faded into the background, like haze, like depth of field, you could lower the opacity. I'm actually going to lower it a teeny bit. Because it's on a separate layer, I can obviously keep masking it. So I could paint off areas, with a brush with white or black as well, because it's on a layer mask. So what I want to do is actually blur this, because as you can see, my background is a little blurred, so those clouds should not be sharp. So I'm actually going to go to blur and just do a little Gaussian blur. Again, make sure you have the photo of the sky selected. And let's blur it just enough where it kind of matches the background of my photo. One thing I like to do when I blur stuff, I like to add a little noise back onto it because it's basically super smooth. So I'm just going to add a 1% noise just to give it a teeny bit more texture than a super smooth. If I kind of zoom in, it has a little bit more texture now. So now that I got my sky, what I can do is I can play with adding those other elements. So what I'm going to do is add in the moon to kind of give it a fantasy look. So I'm just going to drag it over and hit OK. So again, use your move tool, drag it over, and you actually want to make sure it is in the right spot. So I'm actually going to move it above the sky. And the cool thing about when it's on black background is you can try different blending modes and you can kind of see how it works. As you can see, the little light is still showing, but if I go into image adjustments and levels, all I need to do is just kind of increase the blacks and that should go away pretty quick. And then there's just my kind of white part of the moon. Just going to use my move tool. Now let's move it in kind of over here. Because it's on a separate layer, I can free transform it. So go to Edit, Free Transform, or Command T. So you can, size it, make it bigger or smaller. You can rotate it, and then you can obviously flip it horizontal. If you right-click, you can flip it different ways. This way looks good, and then just hit the check to your free transform. And obviously this one shouldn't be as visible, so I'm just going to bring the opacity down, and again I'm going to blur this too, so let's actually blur it a teeny bit more because it'd be a little further away than the clouds, but just so we can see that it's the moon. Let's maybe bring this up a teeny bit. Right about there is good. And then I can add in some of the starry skies. So again, I'm just using my move tool, click on the tab, drag and snap it off, click inside the photo, drag and drop it over, and then hit OK. So same thing, I can try a blending mode. So let's try maybe this one with a soft light. I'm just going to free transform it. So again, Command T to free transform. And I just want like the hint of kind of some stars on the top. And so because it's on the same, or it's on a separate layer, let's just add a little layer mask here. I'm just going to close this. There we go. So add in a layer mask to it by pressing this button. Whatever's white will show, whatever's black won't show. So if I press Command I to invert it, so turn that to black, I'm just going to get my gradient tool. So the gradient tool is here. Shortcut is G on the keyboard. I'm just going to make sure my gradient, so if you can choose the different gradient styles. So I'm just going to click basics and just make sure it is the solid to clear, so it kind of fades off. And I'm going to switch it to the white because white will show it. So if I click and hold, and then drag it down, it'll basically go from like a solid to a clear. So I just want to do enough where again, it just kind of shows the stars on the top. So again, I do want to blur the stars, so I'm just going to apply that Gaussian blur. Make sure you're not on the layer mask, but you actually click and you're blurring the photo, not the layer mask. So again, Gaussian blur. Let's just do this. Because it's on a separate layer, I could do an adjustment to it just to get those stars to pop. So I'm just going to go to image, and let's do levels. I'm just going to increase the highlights a bit, just so they show up a little bit more. Bring down the blacks. There we go. That looks pretty cool. So now I got kind of a cool fantasy edit. So last thing I want to show you is how we can play with the colors in Photoshop. And so I want this to apply to the whole photo. And so what I'm going to do is below my layers, I'm going to click on that half and half circle where it says create a new fill or adjustment layer. I'm going to go to my hue and saturation. And you could just change the hue this way. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on kind of what look you're going for. But what I want to do is actually control the specific color. So I'm actually going to select my yellows. I'm actually going to select the yellows of the background, and I'll kind of select that window. So if I go in and change that hue, it'll be a little bit more precise. So let's kind of make this like a cooler color. You can play with the lightness, so maybe you want it kind of like a nighttime kind of glow. You can add or play with the saturation like so. Keep in mind that she is yellow too, so we want to basically paint back her so that her skin's not blue as well. Or if you want to control that, sometimes, again, this is on a separate layer, you could just lower the opacity and kind of play with the amount of that filter or adjustment layer. And so I'm just going to kind of paint up some on her so she's not super, super blue. So I'm just going to get a brush, set it to black. I'll bring my float about maybe 9%. And I'm just going to do this kind of quick, but just kind of painting off some on her. If I wanted it fully off, I would do 100%, but she would have some blue based on, the environment she's in. I just don't want her as blue. There we go. So it looks a little bit more natural. And so this, again, is just like a fun fantasy edit. So what you can do is, you can obviously save as, and make sure if you want to keep working on it, you can save a Photoshop format with your layers. Just going to change the name and hit OK. So it saves all those layers. So what I'm going to do is actually go to Layer, Flatten Image. I'm going to flatten all my layers together. And I just want to kind of do an overall application to my photo. So I'm just going to go to Layer, Duplicate Layer, make a copy. So it copies my layer. I'm going to go back into the Camera Raw filter here. And I'm just going to give it some overall adjustments, where I can, let's actually bring up the highlights maybe. There we go. Just kind of play with the exposure. Might add a little bit of grain, just kind of give it more texture. Could add a vignette. So again, I'm just kind of applying things so it looks a little bit more like it's together, and I can kind of play with, this, and just give an overall filter to it. So then, you can kind of see before and after how it kind of makes it a little bit more cohesive and just kind of like a fun edit. So again, always once you're finished, flatten those layers. And then this one I'm actually going to File, Save As, and change it to a JPEG so I can actually upload it to the Google Classroom if I was turning this in. So that's just kind of a fun edit. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.